Thank you, Trang, for a wonderful introduction. So, the title of today's presentation of mine is Black and Blue, the Colors of Resistance, Reading Kaala, an Alternative Voice. So basically, Kaala is a Tamil film released in 2018 and directed by an Ambedkarite filmmaker, Paranjit, and produced by Dhanush. The film features Rajnikant in the lead role, set in the backdrop of slums that you can see in this slide, Mumbai's Dharavi slum. And the film revolves around the narratives of the curriculum, commonly known as Kaala, a powerful and righteous leader, community leader. And Kaala is revered as a Robin Hood-like a figure, fighting for the rights of the marginalized community and the oppressed residents of Dharavi slum. The plot delves into the conflicts between the Kaala and the corrupt politician, mainly Hari Dada and the other land dwellers who seek to exploit the slum dwellers for personal gain. And the film explores themes related to inequality and the land rights and the struggles faced by the urban poor. It presents a unique narrative that necessitates a distinct perspective characterized by an Ambedkarite gaze, skillfully employed by director Paranjit. While previous cinematic works explore the theme of the slums, such as like in the film called Slumdog Millionaire, have explored stories set in slum, Kaala distinguishes itself by adopting an anti-caste lens. The film portrays the slum as inhabited predominantly by individuals from Bahujan backgrounds, including scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes and minority communities. It highlights the significance of their communal bonds, their solidarity, celebration, and collective resistance. Kaala stands as a poignant representation of community spirit. In a conversation with Jarina, played by Huma Qureshi, the titular Kaala asserts that I will always be selfish about our rights. My people are not lambs to be slaughtered by anybody. This statement signifies that the historical marginalization and exploitation of Dalits as tools for political and religious fanaticism. However, in the 21st century, this narrative is being challenged by the Dalits as they are no longer as the uninformed and unaware of their rights due to the improved educational and awareness. This paper critically investigates the multifaceted significance of color within the broader context of social and cultural and political landscape, with particular focuses on the emphasis on the color blue, black, and white. These three colors have been chosen due to their symbolic association with distinctive ideological framework in reference to the film Kaala. By exploring the nuances and implication of these colors, I aims to shed light on their profound impact on the various spheres of human existence. This utilization of colors in the works of director Paranjit holds notable importance in both the visual and narrative aspects, ultimately serving as a reflection of his ideological stance as an Ambedkarite. Furthermore, I will explore the significance of special elements and anti-caste assertion within the context of Ambedkarite discourse, highlighting their role in amplifying the notion of alternative and perspective and voice. So here you can see that black is the color of the proletariat. In the film Kaala, director Paranjit presents the black color as in a different light. Basically, he shifted away from its stereotypical and the historical association of it with the mourning and the darkness. Instead, black is here portrayed as a symbol of resistance, resilience, empowerment, and rebellion, particularly in the context of the struggle against the oppression and injustice. The contrast between black and the white is used throughout the film to challenge the entrenched cultural and social norms associated with the white. While white is often seen as a symbol of purity, innocence, and neutrality, it can also be used as a color of to enforce the hierarchical power structure and perpetuate systems of inequality and privilege. By presenting white as a grandeur, Ranjit deconstructs and subverts its meaning and offers black as a color as a form of contestation. Black becomes a representation of resistance and a tool for revolution. The protagonist in the film, named Kaala, played by Rajnikant, named Kaala, which means black in Hindi, and embraces the color black in various forms. Like you can see that he has the black car, and he uses the black umbrella, and then the watch, and the black goggles as well. These choices symbolizes Kaala's rebellious and Protestant nature. The antagonist in the film, played by Nana Patekar, always seen a crystal-clad white and lives in a grand white-clad house. He associates Kaala with the demon king Ravana, perpetuating the mythological projection of asserting Dalits by the Swarna people. However, Kaala rejects this narrative and described himself as a confident and vocal individual beyond religious narrative. Even during the conversation with the antagonist, Kaala challenges the notion that black is impure and ugly, asserting that white is not inherently superior. For instance, when the Haridev asked the Kaala, what sort of name it is, it disgusts me when I say it. This black colors is ugly to look at, irritates my eyes. Kaala replies in an assertive and rebellious tone, white is pure and black is impure. Irritates you, is it? What an ugly thought. The problem is in your perception. Black is the color of the proletariat. I will cut short it because of the time constraint. So basically Kaala in this film present a perspective from below, offering an alternative gaze and aesthetic that emerged from the Dalit community and challenged the binary notion of white as a superior and black as an inferior. Through the symbolism of color, the film deconstructs the established narrative and emphasizes the resilience, empowerment, and rebellion associated with the black. Blue, the color of Ambedkarite consciousness. The color blue, with the diverse connotation across different cultural and historical periods, has emerged as a potent symbol of serenity, spirituality, and transcendence. It often signifies a realm of calmness and contemplation, invoking notion of peace, introspection, and the ethereal. The color blue, as depicted in the film Kaala, emerges as a symbolic representation challenging the dominant Hindu caste hegemony and serves as an alternative discourse. Specifically within the film's songs, the color blue signifies an Ambedkarite consciousness. For instance, the two boys in that frame coming out from that crowd, symbolizing a departure from the Hindu upper caste supremacy. This utilization of blue aligns with the notion presented by Christopher Jefferlot that it represents the resistance against injustice from Dalits. Notably, Dr. Ambedkar introduced the blue flag for his party, the Independent Labour Party, and since then, blue has become associated with the Dalit struggle. Space and anti-caste discourse. The representation of Buddha Vihara and as a cultural and ideological stance, space signifies the anti-caste struggles and the reclamation of identity. It serves as a counterforce against the cultural and spatial dominance of the Brahminical caste system. The Buddha Vihara functions as a community resource center, mirroring the film where Kaala gathers to unite his community and advance the movement. Through various frames, the iconography of Buddha, Jyotiba Phule, Dr. Ambedkar, and Periyar symbolizes the long history of humanity, fraternity, solidarity, harmony, and the compassion, equality, and justice in the face of inhuman treatment, hostility, antipathy within the caste society of India. Buddha, predominantly displayed on community walls and in homes, served as an inspiration for social reformers like Phule and Dr. Ambedkar, who fought for the rights of the oppressed classes. This association is depicted by their inclusion alongside Buddha. The appearance of Periyar on the screen holds an historical significance in the cinematic world. Periyar dedicated his life for the anti-caste movement, aiming to raise awareness and free people from religious dogmas. The portrayal of his bust in the film serves as a powerful assertion of his influence and contribution. Anti-caste assertion and the Ambedkarite consciousness. In Indian society, the struggle of Dalits against casteist forces has persisted for thousands of years. However, the efforts for prominent figures like Phule, Periyar, and Babasaheb have brought about a new direction in this ongoing fight. Notably, the Indian constitution crafted by Dr. Ambedkar has become a significant tool, a weapon for the Dalit community, and a form of protest adopted by Dalit community. such as work stoppage, as depicted in the film, like the Ambedkarite individuals are throwing basically the garbage in front of the municipal corporation of Mumbai to express their dissent against the government. Yeah, thank you. This form of protest can be observed as well in the Indian state Gujarat, where the Dalit community responded to the Una incident by urging community members to cease sanitation-related work as a means of demonstrating solidarity with the Dalit victims. In an alternative scene from the film, Kaala is seen seated on the chair within the Haridev's residence. Haridev, the antagonist, questions Kaala and says, "What right do you have to sit in front of me? You must know who you are." Haridev's intention is to constantly remind Kaala about his lower social status. Haridev, being proud of his Hindu upper caste identity, employs this tactic to assert his dominance. However, Kaala, an individual embracing the Ambedkarite ideology with confidence and strong sense of self, responds by nonchalantly placing his leg on the same table and says, "The distance is the same. Touch my feet, I will decide if I want to punish or forgive you. You might have power, but I have thousands of people as my support, family and champions." In doing so, Kaala conveys an attitude of defiance and asserts his own identity as an Ambedkarite, rejecting Haridev's attempt to subjugate him based on caste and color. Significantly, Haridev constantly insists on receiving gesture of respect such as touching his feet as per Hindu tradition. Conversely, Kaala never requires or compels anybody to kind of touch his feet, symbolizing his commitment to equality rather than establishing a hierarchical structure, power dynamics. Haridev places a great importance on wealth and power, while Kaala recognizes the strength he possesses through the support of his family, community, and companions. This exemplifies the Ambedkarite approach of treating all individuals on equal footing, irrespective of their social or economic standing. Moreover, within the film, Jarina remarks to Hari and says that, "Give me your hand." As she proceeds to shake hands with him, highlights that this act represents true equality. Jarina emphasizes that genuine equality is not manifested through exerting dominance and forcing someone to prostrate themselves, as seen in the practice of touching feet, but rather through respectful interaction and mutual recognition of each other's dignity. In summary, this scene encapsulates the contrasting ideology of Haridev and Kaala, with Haridev emphasizing his Hindu caste identity and hierarchical power, Kaala embodying the Ambedkarite principle of equality and empowerment. I'll just conclude. Like the act of eliminating individual associated with the caste system can be perceived as a rejection of both God and the Hindu mythology. In a particular scene from the film Kaala, the titular Kaala kills the character named Vishnu in the white shirt, who symbolizes a Hindu deity. Following this scene, simultaneously another Hindu deity, Ganesha, is portrayed being thrown into the sea and subsequently drawing. These depictions establish a profound connection and interpretation crafted by Paranjit. Furthermore, during a conversation between Kaala and Hari, whose name also signifies the Hindu deity, Kaala responds to Hari's mention of the Mahabharata, Arjuna and Krishna. Kaala asserts, "If seizing or stealing my lands align with your dharma, your moral duty, or your God's dharma, then I won't even spare your God." This dialogue conveys a clear message from the anti-caste struggle to the Hindu upper caste society. Sorry, I'll just conclude now. Yeah. The film's question can be aptly described as an Ambedkarite, the visual depiction of both the J-Beam flag on the right side in the blue color and the Indian national flag in the concluding frame of the film can be resonate with the Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar's famous quote, "We are Indian firstly and lastly." This juxtaposition emphasizes the message that while advocating for the rights and dignity for the marginalized community, it is essential to remain united as Indian. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Trent, for introducing me. So I'm Yaqi, and my PhD project is a practice-based project on the translation of contemporary Rust Belt Chinese literature. And today I'd like to talk about one of the 6 short stories that I've been working on lately, and to use it to demonstrate my translation approach, which is a highly vocal and orally attuned approach, consisting of 2 stages. One is the literary translation stage, and the other is the audio storytelling stage. And so the title of my presentation is Giving Voice to My Translation Towards a Praxis of the Literary Translator's Vocal Empowerment. So I'll just run over this one. So first, with further ado, the author and his text, the introduction. So the author I'm presenting today, Shange, is one of the writers included in what Chinese critics called the New Northeast Chinese Writers Group. The group of writers all grew up in the northeast formal industrial city of Shenyang, China. The story I choose for today's presentation, entitled The Living Grad, is set in the early 2000s when Shenyang city had been abruptly deindustrialized during the China's reform era, and economic depression led to an increase in the region's criminal activities and a decrease in its population. Some laid-off workers struggled to find jobs, while advertently or inadvertently they got involved in violent events. Others left the region altogether, hoping to make a living down the south of the country. Those are the days of betrayed hopes, broken homes, and the rusted memories of the socialist utopia. The protagonist and the narrator of the story was a 6th grade primary school student who lived with his disemployed mom during the region's depression, and after his father was repeatedly sent into prison for minor offenses. The story traces the protagonist's encounter with a local gangster girl and their adventure into a deserted coal plant, which led to the girl's disappearance and the boy's escape from not only the deserted plant, but from the neighborhood altogether. So to read the story as a translator is first of all to pay close attention to its language. On the surface, the author seems to take pride in the verbal jointness that the Northeast dialect presents with storm-like rhythm, but the local dialect is not, as we will see later, overtly registered at the linguistic level of the text, apart from the occasional mentioning of special names, the use of nicknames, and the disarranging of syntax. These are the things that leave the Chinese reader with the impression that the story has a certain local accent. The accent seems to be played out the most when expressions relating to filth, refuse, bodily waste, and the sexual slurs erupt into the elegant formal Chinese, suggesting the narrator's association of the local speech with abjection and cultural discontents. And to illustrate my point, I want to show you an excerpt from the story where the protagonist mentioned an important event that made them determined to leave the neighborhood. And I'm going to read this paragraph to you. There was only one dry toilet in this district. On winter mornings, a long queue would form in front of it, where people who wanted to poop waited in the cold air and chatted to one another, warm breaths rising from their lips. Once I saw a 40-something woman talking cheerfully with people next to her, and all of a sudden, she jumped out of the queue, dropped her trousers, and crouched down to pass a shit. It would stay there frozen for the whole winter. I often thought of that thing. It shined like a torch straight into my eyes and kept me awake when I stayed up late to read and write. So the pooping scene was actually mentioned again later in the story and has become one of the leading metaphors for the lives of the locals in the narrative. But it is, first of all, a reality of the northern life in the early 2000s, with dry toilets without flushing systems and frozen shit on the road. And to say all these words without a northern accent in Chinese seems to me impossible. As a translator, I read the author's foregrounding of the primitive and the filthy in his depiction of the local life and speech as an articulation of a certain pre-modern habitus of the peasantness as found in classical Marxist discourse, a discourse that has been appropriated by the state to identify the Northeast working class as the out-of-time countrymen. Peasants are sure to be left behind by the modern state, says the government. It's their own fault. In other words, authoritative discourse has successfully imposed peasantness onto people's understanding of the Northeast working class and their language. And this ideology is articulated and parodied in this story told by a local teenager, and with a language that moves nimbly between elegance and obscenity. And for this reason, the North accent must stay, if not sufficiently in my translation, then in my performed reading of the translation. So, textual registers of the local dialect or accent are not the only manifestation of the prose language varied texture. The idealects of marginal social groups within a local society and the local people's penchant for homophones, puns, rhyming, onomatopoeic words propelled by the prosperity of northeastern comedies are all embedded in the music of a prose narrative, providing abundant examples for the Bakhtinian concept of heteroglossia. For Mikhail Bakhtin, the Russian philosopher and literary scholar, heteroglossia refers to a diversity of social speech types, a multi-languageness registered in a prose discourse, either through the dialogues between characters, the hybridized language of the narrator, or through references to the interrelation between different languages at work in a story's social linguistic background. From this understanding derived my translation following excerpt from the story. When the protagonist, a nerdy obedient teenager, went to a pool hall to find Lao La against a girl who half robbed, half borrowed his pen and promised to give it back. Could you please play this? Is Tom there? Oh, sorry, I couldn't see clearly.
Give my pen back, I said. Pen? What pen? You think it's a station shop, do you? You stupid twat. You borrowed my pens 3 days ago, I said. We agreed on this. She said, pick one. Pick what? I asked. Poor game arcade machine. Pick one, play with me for a bit. I don't know how to play either, though, I said. And I have classes this afternoon. Right next to us, the red house playing pool by himself and cat missing shots. I told Lola, if you don't give me the pen, I'm leaving. I stood up, and she raised her hand. Could you just do some stuff? What are you good at? Anything. I finished my letter. Fucking isn't of use to me. I said, I can recite the poem. Fuck! She exclaimed. Fuck. I turned to leave, and she called after me. Hey, go on. Recite it. When you finish, you can fuck up with a fucking pen. Recite it. What's the poem called? I turned around and said, it's a foreign poem. A foreign poem, she said. Where did you learn that? Don't tell me you made it all up. No, I said. I learned it in the bookshop. My mother and I went to a bookshop in town once. Go on then, she said. I've got other things to do. So I began to read. I returned to my city, dear to me as tears, as pains, as the swollen runs of childhood. You have returned, swallowed up quickly then, the cup lever of Leningrad's river tides. Petersburg, say that I may not die yet. You still have my telephone number. Petersburg, I have kept all those addresses that I may evoke the voices of the dead. That's it? She asked. There's still some more I can't remember. This is all managed. Where's Edinburgh? She asked. I don't know. She pointed at me and said with her head. Love that! Did you hear that? The talking recite poems. You know how scheming the stuffed dog. Yet it was called Love that.
So we'll stop here. Yeah, so the excerpt, hope you enjoy that. The excerpt brings to the extreme the above mentioned contrast between the elegant formal language and the obscene speech in the narrative. Here, the gangster girl meets the nerd, and folk speech meets the poetry. Leningrad, the name of the poem that the protagonist recites, was the name of St. Petersburg during Soviet era. The poem was written in the December of 1930 when Russian poet Osip Mandelstam had just returned to St. Petersburg from a commission trip to Armenia. In the poem, he talks about how dear Petersburg, his hometown, is to him, but despite his remaining connections, he refuses to call the city by its new name, Leningrad, and feels he no longer belongs there. On top of this feeling of displacement is approaching danger he feels for his hometown, his poet friends, and himself in the tense politicized atmosphere of the 1930s. For the author, the imagery in the poem Leningrad harks back to Northeast China's socialist past, when the region enjoyed its economic heyday by virtue of its industrial legacy after World War II and the Soviet Union's investment. The once industrial powerhouse was, however, identified by the state as a rusted region and favored by market capital during the country's abrupt turn from socialist to a market economy in the 1990s. The Northeast was gradually deindustrialized and remained underdeveloped ever since. Looking back on his childhood years, the author, quoting Mandelstam's conflicted sense of nostalgia, refuses to call the Northeast town he grew up in as a Leningrad, but a Grad that he is determined to leave, hence the title of the story, Leningrad. So Grad is a Russian suffix meaning city or town. For me, to translate the title into Leningrad rather than the title's literal meaning, which is getting out of the city, is a response to Gareth Stewart's poetic principle of oratority, which points to the destabilizing effect that the reader's reading voice has on the fixed arrangement of written texts. Leningrad is at once an action, living, and an outdated city name, Leningrad, resulting from the collision of the two words during reading. As the story's title, it serves to sustain the poetic among the dense nexus of folk speech by containing double meanings in a single poetic word. And in doing so, it orchestrates a hybrid prose language like the unifying voice of a poet. The novelistic prose stratifies, and the poetic voice unifies. So finally, let's talk a bit more about translation. How do I translate? So to sum up the strategies and decisions I mentioned above, I define my approach as an orally tuned stylistic approach to translation. The crux of the approach is to identify phonological forms of stylistic devices that are foregrounded by the text under translation. And to do so, I draw on three strands of literary theories on textual acoustics. So the first two ones we've already mentioned in my reading, and the last one is what concerns me in the second stage and final stage of my PhD project, which is after literary translation, I will embark on audio remediation of the text to translate the English translated narratives into audio performance. So about the third theory, Helen Grove's theory on literary soundscapes. In her essay, Grove emphasizes that there actually exists a parallelism or resonance between the textual and ex-textual soundscapes in the novel. So, in meaning that the multilanguageness one found in the prose narrative is not something that is invented by the novelist, but is actually resulted from the novelist writing practice, which is surrounded and nourished by the living heteroglossy of language. So from this notion derives my idea of giving live sounds and embodied voices to my literary translation, to not only translate the stories, but also transform them into an audiozyme. And the way to achieve that is by not only doing the home-based recording of my literary translation, but by collecting sonic materials about the sounds that the reader may hear from the story, and by making field recordings in places mentioned in the stories, so as to create audio backdrops or sound effects for my narration, which will hopefully empower my translation and reading with essential, grounded audio content. So on the left of the slide is a sample list of the sounds that I personally hear from Leningrad, but you can obviously hear more than I do. So it's just a sample list, a very short list. And on the right is a map of Shenyang City, the main physical setting of the story. And on the map, I've marked out the places with funny stickers, the places I will be visiting during the field recording. There is a restaurant, barbecue site, a Buddhist temple, things like that. So the purpose of the field recording is actually to revisit the places mentioned in the short stories and to record these three types of soundscapes that I think are indispensable to the style, aesthetics, and effective power of the texts. Yeah. And the recordings hope to capture sonic remnants of heritage lifeways and economic nostalgia within the former working class community in the city. To include their speech, banters, and laughter into my audio work is an endeavor to encourage my readers and listeners to temporarily put aside the busy activity of meaning making and to actually get lost in a pleasurable way in the timbre, texture, rhythm, energy, and music in the local languages and culture. It should be mentioned that these people that the story is representing, they've had their bad times, and they're still being marginalized in the society. But on top of all this, or despite all this, there are indeed different and various voices in the local society, and they are using their own language and voice to tell us that they are not sad people after all. So I think we need to let them speak for themselves, although it's a very different reading from the one sustained by the notion of vulnerability, I guess. And I should also mention that I also own the idea of producing a sound list and for doing field recording in the story's physical settings to John Cage's reflection on his production of Roratorio. This is his script or score. And it's a radio play that he is producing based on James Joyce's novel, Finnegan's Wake. So he's really inspiring for me. So I will conclude my presentation by saying that I hope the field recordings can help me to reflect upon my translation and to hone my vocal and literal representations of the voice of the local characters and to facilitate my sonic experiment of remixing the translated narratives with field recordings and with Northeast folk music. The overall purpose of my project is to translate the text into a series of sound-based performances, and in so doing, express and assert my creative voice as a literal translator, and at the same time to give voice to those underrepresented people or those who are too partially represented. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So I'm Arya, and I'm a first-year PhD student at the School of Arts and Humanities at Nottingham, Trent University. So voices, such a fascinating word, concept, but whose voices get heard? Whose voices are believed? Whose voices are acknowledged? Who gets to be represented? That's the question. So all my life, or I spent most of my childhood in a household where my mother suffered domestic abuse at the hands of her in-laws. So I suffered the impacts of it growing up, and I mostly blamed most of my relatives for the things that I did. And one day my father told me that I should learn to forgive them and to forget it. But the question is, did anyone ever ask my mother if she could forgive those people? I don't think so. That's a problem with voices. Who speaks and who gets to be heard? So coming to the UK as a brown woman, having the privilege and the opportunity to research on social policies, the question that intrigued me was this: who is visible in policies? What happens to the voices of women from immigrant backgrounds and minoritized communities? Are they represented in the policies that are being made? Who speaks for them? Where goes their voices? How do we understand their experience? How are they represented? So, what happened? Yeah. So, domestic violence is not an isolated personal or cultural thing. It is all about control, maintaining control, gaining control, and it's all about power. But if you don't understand it that way, then there's a problem. About 1/3 of all women globally experience domestic violence in their life. In the UK alone, 2.4 million people suffer from domestic violence every year, and about 90% of those people are women. So it's not just a personal thing. It is about economic dependence, it's about isolation, it's about suicidal tendencies, it's about mental health, emotional well-being, it's about support, it's about post-traumatic stress disorders, it's about a lot of things. But do we understand it that way? To me, the problem that I am dealing with here is with policies. So in the UK, people with insecure immigration status, which means people who do not have indefinite leave to remain, like say students, we cannot access public funds. So no recourse to public funds actually stops people from accessing public funds, which gives them support with job hunts, with housing, with childcare, the universal credit, which most people are entitled to. But we are not. So what happens when you're trying to flee an abusive relationship? You cannot access the refuges that are run by organizations because they cannot support you because they are also terribly underfunded. The austerity measures, their funds are cut down. They cannot accommodate you. So what happens is that it creates a disproportionate disadvantage to women from immigrant communities and minoritized backgrounds. Why? Because their problems are intersectional. Thanks to Malini, who set the platform for intersectionality. It starts with Kimberly Crenshaw, but it is very important that we understand that their problems are not to be treated in isolation. There is a case of domestic immigration abuse that's happening in this country because your very own visa status, your immigration status, could be used as a weapon of coercive control by your abuser. If you try to leave, he could report you. You could be deported. Your children could be taken away from you. You won't have a safe space to go. So what do? Suffer in silence. So this is the question that my research is all about. When you distinguish people based on their immigration status, in the UK, you have the destitute domestic violence concession, where women with dissoluted marriage can actually apply to lift their no recourse to public fund status if you are on a spouse visa. So what happened to people who are not on spouse visas? Is it even justful? Is it anything about equality to distinguish people based on their immigration status when you have suffered the same crime? When you are all victims of domestic violence, is it good? Is it anyway justifiable to treat them differently just because you fall in a different visa category? So my research looks at the experiences of victims of domestic violence from different visa categories to find if they really can be treated differently based on their immigration status. So for that, I look at it from a micro perspective by going into the lived experiences of victims, and on a meso category where I would like to approach the organizations that work for women and how they find intersectionality, or they find this understanding of understanding people's experience based on the social locations and the intersecting identities that they're from. How do they deliver support services to these women? And on a macro level, how do policies accept these? How are policies made? How is this very sense of intersectionality included in our policies and the policy making process? How does this conversation happen? So that's what I would like to look into. So intersectionality, this is like a rough idea of what intersectionality looks like, but this is one among the many kinds of representations that intersectionality can have. Many intersectional researchers have been trying to portray different ways, textually, non-textual, graphical, anyways. But the thing is, intersectionality is not a fully developed theory. It's a work in progress. Every single aspect here, race, ethnicity, gender, religious beliefs, your sexual orientation, your color, your disability, the number of children that you have, they can all have massive impact on the kind of experience that you can have. But where does it stop? Where does it start? What is included? What's not included? It never stops. You can never use it as a fully developed theory, but you could use it, you could employ it as a methodology. You could use it to collect more data. You could use it to analyze your data, to understand things in a new light, in a more broader, in a more holistic sense. So the complex and continuous interaction of singular identities of gender, race, your class, they constantly just interacts with the social locations that you are in, which also includes your religion, your immigration status, your sexual orientation, and create systems of oppression. If we don't accept it, then how do we create socially just policies? So in my study, I aim to look at these intersecting locations that people are in and how they contribute towards shaping your experiences, to understanding power relations that is happening within relationships inside the walls of your house, and how they just transcend to the larger society where they are experienced, where they are represented in policies. So acknowledging these complex sets of intersecting structural, legal, and political factors is the first step towards creating socially just policies. So through my research, I hope to at least bring intersectional understanding one step further, and to create an understanding where people's voices are better represented in policies, and to have an understanding that domestic violence is not a personal issue. It is a structural, social, political, gendered issue which should be treated intersectionally.
I hope that makes sense. So that is the references that I've used, and thank you.